the Tour Championship represented the last snooker tournament of the season before we go to the World Championship in a couple of weeks. And quite frankly, as it has done since it got initiated back in 2020, it showed what a great tournament that it is, largely helped by the fact that it's longer format matches, best of 19s all the way through. That's what snooker fans want. That's when snooker really feels like a proper sport, with the greatest of respect. Best of sevens and best of nines, which have their place in certain tournaments. You never really feel as invested in snooker as you do, or at least I do, when we get to these multiple session matches. And it's evidenced by the fact that matches can ebb and flow, and this is something that gets talked about every time we go to multiple session matches. But even last week, John Higgins was 4-1 up on Mark Allen, and he lost 10-7. Ali Carter was 7-1 up on Barry Hawkins, and only ended up scraping through 10-8. Mark Williams was 8-4 up on Tom Ford, and then only won in the decider. So, that just evidences the fact that when you have longer format matches, there's more time for matches to sort of create a storyline, and narratives keep changing. The tournament, as I said in my preview, moved from a 8-man field to a 12-man field. Still don't understand why, and I really hope next season they go back to 8 men. I kind of said in my preview, maybe the silver lining of this change, and something we shouldn't complain about, is it means that there's more snooker. There's more best of 19s to watch. But then you forget that it's on ITV. And for as good as ITV are in terms of snooker coverage and the tournaments they host, they are still sort of back in the Stone Age when it comes to their inability to show more than one table. So even though there was an extra table and an extra 4 matches in the tournament this year, you were still watching the same amount as you normally would anyway. So unless you were in the crowd in Manchester at the venue, it didn't really make a difference to us as fans. And it became kind of irritating when there would be a match playing to conclusion on another table, but we're stuck watching the first session on the other table. But this is really the only real mistake ITV have ever really made. And like I say, I desperately hope it goes back to 8 next season. Whether it does or not, I don't know. But it definitely felt more prestigious when you've just got the top 8. But ultimately, it was a tournament won by Mark Williams, and it is just incredible, isn't it? We talk about Ronnie O'Sullivan, for good reason. I mean, what he's done this season has been nothing short of remarkable, and it could get even better at the World Championship. For Mark Williams, he's already won a tournament this season. At the age of 49, he's still well in the top 16, and it's just a different level. Okay, John Higgins hasn't been winning to the extent that O'Sullivan and Williams have, but even Higgins is hard to knock off. He's still well in the top 16, and the fact that all 3 were comfortably within the top 12 on the 1 year list just shows that age is just a number to these guys. They're not deteriorating. Okay, perhaps they're not getting better with age, but they are still just a stern test for the so-called young guns, the so-called players, the next generation that should be taken over their mantle. But this was just vintage Mark Williams. It really was. His first round, it looked like he was going to get off to a pretty comfortable start. Then Tom Ford came back at him. I think Tom Ford made something like 3 total clearances to get back from 8-4 behind to 8-7. And then it was a real match. And honestly, the clearance, I mean, it wasn't a total clearance, but the clearance, the frame-winning break that Mark Williams made at 9-all in that decider to win against Tom Ford is genuinely one of the best breaks in snooker you'll ever see. I thought I'd seen Judd Trump make one of the best breaks I've ever seen. I think the Champion of Champions earlier this season, that clearance against Sean Murphy that he made. But this break from Mark Williams, he was something like 59-0 down in that decider. Something like 6 reds left. Majority of them were all on cushions. The fact that he managed to make above 25 was impressive enough. To make a frame-winning break from there was just incredible. And then his route from the quarterfinal to the title is just about as difficult as it can get. He played Judd Trump, obviously one of the men of the season, along with Ronnie O'Sullivan, and dismantled him. Judd Trump, a quick word on him, I think he'll be slightly disappointed. This was the first real poor performance I've seen from Judd all season. Judd's lost matches, but he usually puts up a pretty good effort. But he was really sort of all over the place. And that might just make him, switch on a little bit more, because this would be the worst time to sort of collapse at a Tour Championship and then the World Championship. But Mark Williams done an absolute job on him. To beat Judd Trump 10-4, especially considering the season Judd's had, was mightily impressive. Then you go and you play Mark Allen, another player that's won multiple tournaments this season, and again dismantle him. Okay, from 9-0 to 9-5, you suddenly started to think, could we be seeing the most incredible comeback in the history of snooker? But Mark Williams still got over the line pretty comfortably. And the way that he just routed Allen to go 9-0 up was just amazing. And then he went and played the final against Ronnie O'Sullivan, didn't he? And there was actually a bit of a surprise. I was doing some research into that final on Sunday. And considering both these men have been on tour since 1992 and have basically been at the top of the game ever since then, this is the fourth ranking final between the two of them. The first since the year 2000, and in fact the three finals before this week was in the year 2000 as well, which is mental really when you think about it. 24 years of playing at the very highest level of the sport and never meeting in a final. And O'Sullivan had won all those three finals as well, and O'Sullivan does in general have a pretty strong record against Mark Williams. I think it was something like he'd won 22 of their past 24 meetings. And O'Sullivan had this burst from 3-1 down to 5-1 up, where he was just playing near perfect snooker. And that can rattle a lot of people, but Mark Williams, as we know, just has this laid-back temperament where nothing seemingly ever affects him. And he came out and played pretty much flawless. To come back from 5-3 down to beat O'Sullivan 10-5, Mark Williams is basically the only man in the game that could accomplish that. And he did it very impressively. The last frame was a bit of a wobble, and he needed sort of 4 or 5 chances to get over the line. But to do that, to O'Sullivan, it's a huge feather in his cap. It's his highest payday since he won the World Championship in 2018. And to be honest, I can't really think of a better performance in a tournament from him since that World Championship win. Just hugely impressive. And if you're looking for another player to think, could they win a World Championship? I mean, Mark Williams has just put himself into that conversation. And then if we look at sort of other players in the draw, John Higgins and Mark Selby, they in particular had pretty poor campaigns. John Higgins, he was 4-1 up against Mark Allen and he was looking pretty comfortable. Then 4-1 becomes 4-all. And going into that second session, Mark Allen just looked the heavy favourite. And I don't think anyone's ever going to write off John Higgins, particularly when you see what Mark Williams has done last week and you see what Ronnie O'Sullivan has done for the past, not just this season, but basically the past 10 years. So you're never going to count off John Higgins, but it is disappointing for him, particularly whenever he's playing the top players. He just seems to crumble every now and then, and he's not as consistent as he needs to be to get results against the top boys. Mark Selby, this was a big chance for him, and a 10-8 loss to Gary Wilson would have been disappointing. I mean, Gary Wilson's a fantastic player, and I'll speak quickly on Gary Wilson in a second. But Mark Selby was poor, and he said in his post-match interview, okay, never read too much into a post-match interview because emotions are raw, and you often say things you don't necessarily mean. But Selby was obviously dejected in his game. And he said, he's not looking forward to going to the World Championship if that's the state that his game is in. But then, rewind like 3 weeks when he beat O'Sullivan 6-0. He was saying that, he was really confident in his game. So, confidence in snooker can go up and down, up and down, up and down. And we know Selby's going to be a handful at the World Championship. He always is. But it was a disappointing defeat for him. Him and Higgins, 4-time world champions, they know what to do at the Crucible, but they do come in potentially slightly under the radar. in the fact that they just haven't been performing to the level that a lot of the other boys have been this season. But I did mention Gary Wilson, and what I will say is he's had a season that's making me sort of think twice about him as a player. No longer is he this dark horse, banana skin player. He is a genuine contender for titles now. He really is. The win against Selby, the win against Sangander, he pushed O'Sullivan pretty close in that semi-final as well. And he's reached a Crucible semi-final. He's won 3 titles. He's really building a CV at the back end of his career. And we've seen players like Barry Hawkins do it, Stuart Bingham in recent years, where they hit their sort of late 30s and become a different animal and become really consistent. And he could be the same. I genuinely think he's someone to watch at the World Championship. Once the qualifiers are done and the draw's made, I'll obviously preview that tournament in full. But if you're looking at outside bets, Gary Wilson is high up there. I've seen him as high as something like 20-1. And when you consider there's players like Neil Robertson, who's in the qualifiers and not guaranteed to make it to the Crucible, Neil's something like 12-1. So there's definite value in Gary Wilson. And not only is his game sort of suited to the Crucible and the fact that he's quite measured, but he does it quite quickly as well. He's not the most attacking player, but he's still pretty fast. And when he's on it, he can score as heavy as anyone. And he's got a pretty good tactical game as well. So a definite player to look out for at the Crucible. That's it. Talking about the Crucible, less than 2 weeks now. It's unbelievable. It's that time of year where everything is just snooker. It's just World Championship. It's just Sheffield. Absolutely love it. If you're in the need of more snooker content, and in particular more World Championship content, last week I made my preview and predictions of the World Championship qualifiers, where I tried to predict the 16 men to qualify for the Crucible. So if you have a spare something like 45 minutes, give that a watch. I'll leave the link to the video in the description below. But for now, Mark Williams, what a man. Just incredible the career he's having. And at 49, absolutely no signs of that slowing down.